If you watched our videos, you've now met 4 artists, 6 if you count Mark and me, who practice, perform, study devised theater. And if you didn't go to school at one of our more progressive institutions or study theater abroad or like ever, you might be asking yourself, what is devised theater?
That's a good question. And if you're curious, stay tuned as we dive into the devised.
As you can probably tell by the fact that we're devoting an entire video essay to the topic, there is no universal definition for devised theater. But devised theater practitioners do all agree on one thing. Devised theater is not traditional American theater. Even the term American theater is somewhat of a misnomer. Think about the one playwright that every high school student in the United States was forced to read. Did you say William Shakespeare? Well, Billy Shakes lived in England, and he lived hundreds of years before the United States was even a country. Also, fun fact, scholars have devoted volumes of research as to whether this guy wrote any of Shakespeare's folio. Besides, as we all learned in the very important documentary Shakespeare in Love, Rupert Everett had all the good lines, and Joseph Fiennes was hopeless at anything besides drinking, banging, and stealing other people's ideas.
Romeo. Romeo is Italian, always in and out of love.
Yes, that's good, until he meets.
Ethel,
Do you think?
the daughter of his enemy.
The daughter of his enemy.
His best friend is killed in a duel by Ethel's brother. Or something. His name is Mercutio.
Mercutio. Good name.
But I digress. American theater is, like many of the things we think of as quintessentially American, the product of colonization. In other words, it's a bunch of stuff we stole from Europe. We're the only minds ever to think about anything important ever came from. And I guess that brings us right to the first problem with traditional American theater. For the centuries that it's existed, it has prioritized only one voice, white and male.
Traditional American theater starts with a single writer, working with a single producer to execute a single vision by those who have power and who are established and who are already in the system. And those people tend to be white, white men and white presenting people. And so therefore it's very challenging for those of us who don't identify as white male to make our inroads into American, quote, American theater.
Ricky introduced another important element of traditional American theater, one not generally found in devised theater, and that's specifically delineated hierarchical roles. At the top of the hierarchy, you've got the producers of the money. They hire the director and the writers. The director creates the artistic vision, and the writer creates the script. And below them, they are the actors. They say the lines that the writer wrote, and they take the direction from the director. And to the side, you've got your designers. The designers fulfill all the other tasks that bring the director's vision to life. So your set, your costumes, your staging, everything, the props, all comes together requiring some level of collaboration. The level of collaboration involved will differ between productions. I mean, let's be real. The more powerful, see rich and famous any one of these artists are, especially if it's the director or writer or the actor, the more limited the amount of collaboration will be between different groups. We recognize that this is a broad, sweeping, and somewhat cynical definition of traditional American theater, and we are grateful that the broader collaboration and equity has increased in most theater spaces. But we're offering a historic definition here, and much like American society as a whole, traditional American theater was, and to some extent still is, anything but equitable. So, how is devised theater any different?
I've come to the understanding that devising is not one thing, and it means various things to various people. And that's where it differs from traditional theater making, which kind of has a linear path or a trajectory mapped out, where either you pick an existing playwright, or you write a script, or you have a story or something in mind, and then you kind of construct it to, as you go along, but it still has a linear path, a sort of a skeleton, a trajectory, which we have inherited from the history of theater, from the various playwrights, directors, actors from all over the world.
So devised theater generally doesn't start with a script. It's like creating a whole production from scratch. Now you may be saying to yourself, Sarah, isn't that just improv? Yes. And see what I did there? There are other elements to devising that make it different from improv. For example, rather than starting with a suggestion from the audience, ideas for a devised production may germinate from objects or may grow from personal experience.
My craft, my process, for sure come from a thought, from something that you are exposed, right? A poem, a visual art piece. So of course, or it could be something from my own story, my background. As a BIPOC, I'm Puerto Rican, from this archipelago, this island, colonized island, which we have a lot in our head, right? Like in our process, in our story and our background, that story that we have, and that history really is introduced in all that I do in my process.
Now, devised theater comes from a more experimental place than the linear path that traditional theater follows. It originated when all the groovy experimental things did, the 1960s. Yes, that's right. It is in fact not a new invention from the early 2000s, nor is it something that we made up here in the United States. No, like most American theatrical forms, devised theater is something we stole from Europe. I wonder why is that true? Could it be that state-sponsored funding allows experimental theater to thrive? No, that's crazy talk. So this weird experimental art form thrives in Europe, and companies like Complicité and Frantic Assembly and Gecko sell out theaters in the UK. But here in the United States, when a famous playwright is asked to identify any current professional devised theater companies, they struggle to name a single one. And hey, if you want to see your acting school classmates cringe, just utter the dreaded words. You want to see my new devised piece? It explores the liminal space. Your classmates' trepidation is likely because devised theater is just so hard to define. For example, in one of the few academic publications on the subject, Devising Performance, A Critical History, Deirdre Hedden and Jane Milling tell us that devising is a process of generating performance.
Of course, that definition could really encompass all theater made ever, and performance art too. Think about it. Every theatrical work has a creation process by which it comes into being, right? Like Disney, for example. If they're touring The Little Mermaid, they're going to cities all over the country, they're doing catcalls for singers and dancers, hiring choreographers, dialect coaches, spending millions of dollars to make it a big, shiny spectacular. If you're a performance artist, that process could be living in a museum for 12 days on view for the entire public.
Hundreds of people a day went through that exhibit. Each one had the opportunity to interact with Isabella in a moment of great vulnerability.
Wait, wrong clip.
And she's doing this for how long? 16 days.
No, not that one.
I've basically been 12 days in the gallery, not drinking anything but water and not having any kind of food. There was 3 units that you can see very clearly. One was just a bench, which I slept. Then there was a sitting unit with a table and a chair. And then the toilet and the shower, which I would take a daily shower and go to the toilet.
If we're talking about performance generation, well, that can cover everything from T Swift's Eras Tour to the T Swift impersonator my nibblings rocked out to at Canterbury last month. video essays to Twitch streams to candidates.
You're getting sidetracked again.
Yeah, and I don't think this is the essay where we get into the esoteric definitions of what performance is, starting with the cavemen and their chef puppets.
It's not. It's the one where we try to define devised theater. So back to our experts, Hedden and Milling. They recognize that there is an enormous variety of devising processes used, and they offered this alternative definition. Devising is a social expression of non-hierarchical possibilities, a model of cooperative and non-hierarchical collaboration, an ensemble, a collective, a practical expression of political and ideological commitment, a means of taking control of work and operating autonomously, a decommodification of art, a commitment to total community, a commitment to total art, the negating of the gap between art and life, the erasure of the gap between spectator and performer, a distrust of words, the embodiment of the death of the author, a means to reflect contemporary social reality, a means to incite social change, an escape from theatrical conventions, a challenge for theater makers, a challenge for spectators, an expressive, creative language, innovative, risky, inventive, spontaneous, experimental, non-literary.
This is starting to remind me of that one time where we tried to do a budget video for people to give us money for a devised theater festival, and it started with 8 different definitions of what devised theater is.
It's so hard to explain what device is.
Can't we just agree to define devised theater as creating theater from scratch?
We could. Hedden and Milling also define it that way. So does Jennifer Torrance in Rethinking the Performer Towards a Devising Performance Practice. A Google search of devised theater from scratch also brings up even more matches. For something so nebulous, it's a bit ironic that so many have landed on the exact same words to describe it. So I guess I won't shame Sarah for unoriginality. This time.
I notice you haven't offered a definition of what devised theater is yet, Mr. Always Original and never ever just quotes movies at me.
Devised theater starts with component pieces that are grouped together, and over time they take shape in a direction that evolves throughout the process. You don't start with the final thing in mind. It's a collaborative process.
Yeah, I think maybe collaboration. I would say it's a very collaboration art form.
Playing together with various kinds of people who all own different roles and kind of have, if not absolutely equal, but at least a fair amount of agency in building the work together or in building whatever we are there for.
In his essay, Collusion Between Celebrants, Michael Radcliffe also notes the importance of collaboration to complicity's process, saying, "The actor's imagination creates theater as much as those of the writer and director." So, what I'm hearing then is that collaboration is an essential element to the devised theater creation process.
It can be, though you may remember from our respective master's theses that you can also create devised works as a solo performer.
I guess I blacked out trying to create live performance during the plague. Okay, another thing we've talked about is hierarchy. Is a lack of hierarchy essential to the definition of devised theater?
Yeah, but I mean, some of the companies we've discussed have pretty prominent artistic directors who play an outsized role in shaping the final product, the performance that the audience sees.
So what you're saying then is when I try to explain what devised theater is to my friends and family who don't speak artist, creating theater from scratch is maybe the best shorthand, even if I stole it from Professor Google.
For what it's worth, I don't think that you plagiarized that definition. I think that a lot of great minds with similar lexicological habits have come to the same definition on their own. But I also think that it's kind of cool that we don't really need to have a universal definition. What better way to disrupt American theater than with a form that can't be defined?
Agreed. Shocking, I know, since we decided to create an entire YouTube channel about it together. Of course, to create a devised production, you can't just wander forever in the miasma of an undefined process.
That's right. For example, Physical Lies uses a process that incorporates physical improvisation, movement scores, which may appear dance like or, well, dance adjacent to an audience. And we're also huge fans of intermodal shifting. Think performative arts and crafts.
Yeah, you may think the 2 hours we spend together bemoaning whatever Reddit and the Washington Post have upset us with that day is completely unrelated to the work that we're creating. But we assure you and us, it's not. And we have more specific roles in the creative process which play to our respective strengths.
Sarah is physicalized dramaturg or script writer, but the script remains a living object throughout the creative process. We try not to set things in stone until the performance, and even then, sometimes there's some flexibility.
For example, we were fortunate enough to workshop our inaugural piece, How to Escape Hell, last summer, and to show a work in progress of it the summer before. There's very little of that first iteration currently in the script, and about only half of the second. When we get stuck, we go back to our toolkit. So we'll make a new movement score or do some intermodal shifting to get unstuck. And we hope to incorporate more performers into future iterations of the show, which will mean a lot of rewriting to make sure the script reflects their truths in their voices and not just words that resonate with Mark and me.
With two people, it's also hard to have a dedicated director, so we took turns being outside eye for our individual scenes. In our devising process, an outside eye is like a director, but rather than impose specific choices or blocking, as most directors do, an outside eye tells you what they see in the performance, offers prompts to provoke responses, and collaborates with you to ensure effective communication to the audience of the concepts or images or themes that the performers want to convey.
Mark served as our prop master, and in that role for How to Escape Hell, he designed a TV tree on casters, which thematically connected the realms and practically showed the short films that were integral to our work. Also in that role, he supervised me painting the portals that would allow us to enter and escape hell, both to ensure that I didn't actually end up in hell and because I'm really bad at painting. So I needed the supervision.
Because that's the other thing about being a devised theater partnership. We too have to do all the things. We're in the US, which means self funding and fighting with hundreds, if not thousands, of other performers for the extremely limited grant resources that nonprofits and government provide. On the one hand, it's great to bring new voices to theatrical performance, to disrupt hierarchical norms and create on our own terms. But on the other, if we're creating in a form that no one knows or understands, it's hard to recoup production costs from patrons or the audience.
And I'm not sure if you heard this, but theater is dead. Pandemic fear has abated. People are returning to concerts and ball games. They're not coming back to theater. There are many reasons for that, of course. But as artists who not only love the medium, but really want people to see our work, we have a vested interest in the type of theater that gets made. Devised theater not only gives some audiences something new, and everyone likes shiny new things,
but it can also directly address some of the specific complaints of the no longer theater going audience, whether that's the cost of attendance or the stories we tell and who gets to tell them. A good devised theater performance does not necessarily require the same funding as a Broadway spectacular. And because new devised works originate in the minds and bodies of the performers who created them, devised theater is widely accessible, regardless of class, race, identity, neurotypicality, or physical limitations. without pandering or token casting.
Devised theater is theater of, for, and by the people. Yet it's just not a widely recognized, much less widely produced form here in the United States. There's no time like the present for all of us to think and act collectively to change that.
Thanks again to Manishikha Baul, Chih-Jou Cheng, Ricky Peck, and Steph Reies for sharing their thoughts. And extra thanks to you for sticking around as we tried to define the somewhat undefinable. We hope that you enjoyed learning about devised theater, and if you did, you want to learn more about the theater creation process or about some of the other issues that traditional theater is facing, then like, subscribe, share, follow, and hit the notification bell to join us here next time as we dive into the devised.